Overhead cranes provide a valuable service in water utilities. They're the only way we're able to move some dangerous chemical containers and other large pieces of equipment. But they also can be a source of serious, even fatal injuries if used incorrectly. And not just to the workers operating them, everyone in the area is at risk. Accidents involving overhead cranes are usually a result of one of the following factors. The hoist is loaded beyond its capacity. The load is improperly balanced. The rigging is incorrect or insufficient. Operators and riggers fail to communicate properly. And other employees working in the vicinity inadvertently walk into the path of the crane work. There's an additional danger associated with the use of indoor cranes, the risk associated with the load being transported. Not only are the loads very heavy, but as in the case of chlorine cylinders, the contents may be toxic. Extra precautions are required when moving dangerous chemicals and substances because an accident can result in the release of hazardous materials. There are several types of overhead cranes used indoors at utilities. Typical large chain hoists have a capacity of 5 to 10 tons or more and are powered by motors. Most have a railed support structure with a wheeled trolley that travels across a bridge. These are the cranes used to move large chlorine cylinders, pumps, and other heavy pieces of water utility equipment. Smaller chain hoists are manually operated with workers pulling the chains to lift the loads. These hoists are mobile, temporary, and are securely attached to an overhead I-beam or fixture. Other small manual hoists powered by a foot pedal are designed to lift lighter loads. And that's a good place to start, knowing what the maximum load is for the piece of equipment you're working with. The rated load capacity of a crane should be clearly marked on the side of the machine and in the manufacturer's operating manual. Of course, that also means you need to know how much the load is you're transporting. Don't just guess at this. An overloaded crane is a disaster waiting to happen. Before ever using the crane, the operator and crew should inspect the equipment to make sure it's working right. This is an OSHA and American National Standards Institute requirement. Inspections are categorized as frequent and periodic. Frequent inspections take place daily to monthly. Daily refers to the fact that the operator should visually examine the equipment at the start of each shift. At least once a month, a qualified inspector should also examine the equipment and make a written record of the inspection. Frequent inspections include check the hook for cracks, examine the hoist chains, ropes, straps, and slings for excessive wear. Check all operating mechanisms or pulleys for proper alignment and operation. All exposed moving parts, such as gears, should have guards or shields in place. If the large overhead crane has a cab, make sure trash and unnecessary materials are removed. Check the cab door or safety chain, controls, the warning signal horn, and the operator's seat for proper operation. Periodic inspections are more detailed, and their frequency is based on the use or service of the hoist. Light service requires a periodic inspection of at least once a year. Normal service indicates a monthly inspection is appropriate. Heavy service requires at least a weekly inspection, and excessive service may require a periodic inspection daily. For a periodic inspection, a qualified inspector should examine all of the parts mentioned earlier in the frequent inspection. The inspector should also look for loose rivets and bolts. The motor of the hoist should be examined. All electrical switches and components should be checked. Check the chain drive sprockets, bearings, gears, and rollers. And finally, if the machinery has been disassembled for maintenance and repairs, the inspector should conduct load testing to make sure the hoist is operating at its designed rating. The inspector's periodic written record should be filed along with maintenance records for the machine. Now that the hoist has been inspected, we can go ahead and put it to work. That requires a crew of at least 2 people. One person to operate the crane and one person to signal the operator. Additional riggers may also be needed to help hook up large loads. Center the crane hoist directly over the load so it won't swing when it's first lifted. Never use the crane's hoist chain as a sling. Be sure the chain is vertically straight, untwisted, and properly aligned in the load sheave. Attach the load to the crane's hook with approved slings and straps. The load must be securely attached to the hook and the hook safety latch closed. Make sure slings and straps aren't stretched or frayed, and never try to splice a broken strap. Any unused straps or slings should be secured so they don't drag behind while the load is moved. Riggers should keep their hands and feet away from the load when slack is taken out of the sling. All riggers should step back away from the load as it's first lifted. Warn all people in the path of the load and clear away any other obstructions before the load is ever lifted. Be aware of any overhead pipes or power lines that might come into contact with the load while it's moving. If the crane is electrically powered, make sure crew members and equipment don't come in contact with the electric source. Communication is a key component of crane safety. The operator can't always see everything needed to move large loads, so a signal person will help guide them. Voice and two-way radios are sometimes used, but what about a noisy environment? That's when a predetermined set of hand signals is used. Now, there may be slight variations in the signals we're about to show you, but the important thing is that both the operator and the signal person are on the same page. Here are the basics. Hoist or up is when the signaler moves an arm vertically with forefinger up in a small horizontal circle. Lower is when the arm and forefinger is pointed downward and moved in a small horizontal circle. Bridge travel is when the arm is extended forward, hand open, making a pushing motion in the direction of travel. Trolley travel is signaled with the palm up, fingers closed, and the thumb pointing in the direction of the motion. When it's important to move the load slowly, the signal person puts a motionless hand directly in front of, above, or below the hand giving the motion signal. Thumb and fingers pressed together also signals the operator to move slowly and carefully. Stop is with the arms extended. Some signalers use a closed fist to signal stop. Every employee on the crane crew should understand these signals so they can anticipate when and where the load is going. However, the only person signaling or talking to the overhead crane operator is the designated signal person. The only exception to that rule is when someone on the crew sees a hazard that requires an emergency stop. Always lift the load slowly at first to make sure it's properly balanced. Lift straight up. Don't side pull a load because it puts stress on the hoist and can result in the load swinging back and forth. If the hoist is connected to a trolley, avoid banging the trolley into the end stops on the beam. This puts stress on the hoist and results in swings. The hoist motor should be used slowly and consistently. Don't rev or jog it as the load is moved. Use the crane's warning signal or horn to warn nearby workers that it's in use. As the load travels, watch it closely to make sure it doesn't get hung up or stuck. If it does, the crane may reach its load capacity quickly and the rigging components may fail. Raise the load only as high as necessary to clear the floor and any obstacles that can't be moved. Never lift a load over the head of workers and never leave a load suspended. Don't allow rigging crew members to stand next to or stand on the load while moving, as they could be trapped or hurt if it swings. When it's necessary to help balance and control the load, do so carefully by positioning your body in a spot where it can't be trapped, or use guide ropes that can be controlled from a distance. After transport, when possible, the load should be lowered to rest on blocking material so it doesn't damage the sling. Once the load has been moved and all tension has been taken off of the hoist, disconnect the hook, carefully remove the rigging, and store it in a place that is safe and dry. As we mentioned earlier, there are some additional safety tips to keep in mind when moving large 1-ton chlorine cylinders, since the contents are potentially so hazardous. First, make sure the cylinder is always secure and can't move or roll. That means keeping the tires of the transport vehicle chalked, and the cylinders securely blocked both before and after they are hoisted. Chlorine cylinders can be damaged during transport, so before you accept them, visually inspect the entire cylinder. Check for gouges, dents, pitting, bulges, and corrosion. Also feel them to make sure they're cool to the touch. A hot container may be contaminated. Attach them to the hoist carefully, always making sure the valve covers remain in place and are not attached to any of the rigging. Once downloaded, block the cylinder and use extra care when removing the rigging to avoid contact with the valve and any of the chlorine lines in the vicinity. When using a small manually operated hoist, keep several safety factors in mind. It's critical that the load does not exceed the load limit marked on the hoist. It's also critical that this temporary device is securely attached to an I-beam or overhead fixture that is capable of handling the hoist and the load. Because of their fixed position overhead, these devices are primarily used to raise loads up to be set in a raised position. Many of the hoisting principles discussed earlier in this video do apply here, such as lifting the load slowly to avoid swing. However, because of the design of the device, the operator is situated in close proximity to the load as it is lifted, so this should only be attempted by experienced operators. In fact, if employees have not been properly trained on overhead cranes, it may be necessary to employ a lockout, tagout policy on their use. Like so many of the things we do here at the utility, experience and training are very important. If you haven't been trained on an overhead crane, don't even attempt using one. In addition to understanding all of the safety tips included in this video, anyone using an overhead crane should have good eye-hand coordination and good depth perception. Training should include a discussion of proper rigging technique and balanced lift points. The operator should be trained on the specific device he or she will be using so they understand wear limits, braking mechanisms, slip clutches, and any other features of a specific overhead crane. It's important to train on the overhead crane without a load at first to become comfortable with its operation. And finally, training should place an emphasis on maintenance and inspection routines. Proper inspection will prevent mishaps. It's the inspector's job to not only document problems and concerns, but also to alert maintenance professionals. If the crane doesn't pass the inspection, it should immediately be marked and pulled out of service. The overhead crane is a sophisticated and expensive piece of utility equipment. Don't neglect it. Ongoing maintenance will prolong its life and, from a safety standpoint, the life of you and your co-workers. Well, that's our look at safety for overhead cranes. Remember, inspections, training, communication, and proper hoisting technique are the 4 do's of crane safety. Think before you lift.